to you now, if I can get over
Go
there.
ahead. Yep.
Okay, good evening, all of you council persons and people. I appreciate you signing in this evening. And before we begin our council meeting this evening, I wanted to share with you a prayer for
Make sure everybody is on mute.
Hear him.
make sure that
A
your
lot of strange feedback.
Yeah.
so you have your phones on mute. Okay. All right, so we'll start again here. As I said, I found a prayer online about our uncertain times, so I'd like to say that this evening. So we'll start before our council meeting with this prayer. It says, "Dear Lord, may we who are merely inconvenienced remember those lives that are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. And Lord, may we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health and making their rent. And may we who have the flexibility to care for our children when our schools are closed remember those who have no options. And may we who are losing our margin money in this tournament of our economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. As fear grips our nation, let us choose love. And during this time, when we may not be able to physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors. Amen."
Amen.
All right, we'll
Okay.
Okay, well, council now will come to order, and we will start by the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
States of
and
America,
to the republic
and
for
to the
which it
republic
stands,
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and
and justice for all.
justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call.
Mrs. Anya Buile,
Present.
Mr. Dressel,
Here.
Mrs. Hahn,
Here.
Mr. Paul,
Here.
Mr. Petrella,
Here.
Mr. Timmons,
Here.
Mr. Villamagna.
Here.
All members of council are present and accounted for. So I'll call on Mrs. Hahn.
Yes, I move that we approve the minutes of April 14, 2020 as written. Second.
Who was the second?
Mr. Timmons.
Timmons. Mr. Timmons.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that the minutes of April 14, 2020 be approved by roll call.
Mrs. Anya Buile,
Yes.
Mr. Dressel,
Aye.
Mrs. Hahn,
Aye.
Mr. Paul,
Aye.
Mr. Petrella,
Aye.
Mr. Timmons,
Aye.
Mr. Villamagna.
Aye.
So moved. Minutes of April 14, 2020 are approved as written. We'll now move over to petitions and communications, Madam Clerk.
Nothing this evening.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We'll now move on to ordinances and resolutions before City Council this evening, starting off with ordinance number 2020-17 by the Finance Committee of Mr. Paul, Mr. Dressel, Mr. Timmons for its third and final reading.
Ordinance number 2020-17, an ordinance authorizing and directing the approval of expenditures without a purchase order over $3,000 pursuant to the Ohio Revised Code, Section 5705.41.
You heard the reading of ordinance number 2020-17. Is there anyone wishing to speak on it? Please state your name. question?
Question.
Roll call?
Mrs. Onyebuile, Mrs. Onyebuile,
Yes.
Mr. Dressel,
Can you hear me?
yes.
Okay, thanks.
Aye.
Mrs. Hahn,
Aye.
Mr. Paul,
Aye.
Mr. Petrella,
Aye.
Mr. Timmons,
Aye.
Mr. Villamagna.
Aye.
So moved. Ordinance number 2020-17 is duly adopted and will take effect on May 21, 2020. We'll now move on to ordinance number 2020-20 by the Service Committee of Mr. Dressel, Mrs. Hahn, Mr. Petrella for its first reading.
Ordinance number 2020-20. An ordinance authorizing and designating the city manager as the local official with the authority to execute the project agreement known as Dresden Avenue Resurfacing Improvements from the north terminus to approximately 850 feet south. City project number 2020-114 and complete all necessary functions that may be required to complete said project, including but not limited to engineering design services, right-of-way services, including acquisition of right-of-way, utility relocation, including utility easements, construction administration inspection services, bidding services, advertising for bids for construction, subject to the right to reject any and all bids, entering into a contract with the lowest and most qualified bidder, authorizing payment therefore, and rebidding that may be required.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to ordinance number 2020-17 by the Finance Committee of Mr. Paul, Mr. Dressel, and Mr. Timmons for, I'm sorry, my mistake. We'll now move on to ordinance number 2020-21 for its first reading. That's by the Service Committee of Mr. Dressel, Mrs. Hahn, and Mr. Petrella.
Ordinance number 2020-21. An ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with the Ohio Department of Transportation for the JEF-43-4.18 Sunset Boulevard Resurfacing Project, PID 109618, and perform all necessary functions that may be required to complete said project.
Okay, well, that concludes our ordinances and resolutions before City Council this evening. We'll now move on to reports from our standing committees, starting off with, Mrs. Anya Weebley.
None tonight, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Dressel.
Nothing this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Dressel. Mrs. Hahn.
Just a brief report. At this point, the 2 additional people are not being hired by the Parks and Recreation Department because we're putting on hold the hiring of people and the moving of people from department to department until we clearly get on the other side of whatever the financial crisis will be that is pending. So using this time without having to do all of the programming, the existing park staff has been working hard to deep clean and do some projects at the MLK Center, relocating files, doing various things. Lori does want me to pass on the idea that people, on the one hand, can and should use the parks. It is possible to come, to the park and walk around, hike, bike, jog. People can go to the marina, they can go to Beatty Park, but we do want people to be clear that they should not be going on the playground equipment. At this point, we don't have staff that can just stand there and try to keep it clean, and so it's going to be important that people stay off the play equipment for now. Also, in terms of the tot lots, she has been in conversation with the 3 tot lots where people are volunteering to care for those, and that has begun. And I don't know when we're going to have the conversation about the flats, but that is that is one park we do not have any volunteers for. And for those interested, we are going to be looking for volunteer help to help us get through this time period without having that additional support. So we're hoping that, when people feel like they can come outside and be a part of helping to clean up and do things, do some planting at the parks, that they will be in touch with our director, Lori Federoff. Finally, the baseball hasn't made a definitive decision yet. They're waiting on the governor. But if by May 1st there isn't a clear go-ahead from the governor's office, the Little League season for the spring will not happen. But they also have planned a season for the fall. So then that is, they're very hopeful that that's all going to take place. So we'll just have to wait for more information from them. But it is important for people's well-being and honestly to air out their houses when the temperature gets more pleasant, and it's a good thing to be outdoors. So it's a good time to enjoy the parks that we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Hahn. Go over to Mr. Paul.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. I have one. It's a resolution, and it's under finance. It's a resolution authorizing the city to participate in the Ohio Department of Transportation annual road salt contracts. It's awarded in 2020. We do this every year. I know last year we didn't use a lot of salt, but this is the bidding process, and we do this every year around this time. I have that. And then second, Your Honor, I would like to make a motion that we enter into an executive session so the council can discuss future contract negotiations with all three unions, that being AFSCME, police, and fire. Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we go into executive session after public forum to discuss the contracts, future negotiations with the three unions. Roll call.
Mrs. Onyabuile,
Yes.
Mr. Dressel,
Aye.
Mrs. Hahn,
Aye.
Mr. Paul,
Aye.
Mr. Petrella,
Aye.
Mr. Timmons,
Aye.
Mr. Villamagna.
Aye.
So moved. We'll be going into executive session following public forum. Thank you. Is that all, Mr. Paul?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now move on to Mr. Petrella.
Nothing tonight, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Petrella. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
We'll now move over to Mr. Timmons.
Nothing this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Timmons. And finally, Mr. Villamagna. Mr. Villamagna?
On there? Okay. Mayor, just a question. Are any department heads in the meeting or on teleconference with us?
No. Is there specific?
Costa.
Costa.
Okay. Okay, never mind then. Mr. Dolak was in there. I just wanted to ask him a question, but that's fine. I have nothing this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Villamagna. All right, that concludes our standing committees. We'll now move on to reports from our administrative officers, starting off with our city manager, Mr. Mavromatis.
Thank you, Mayor. To council, in the event, since we'll probably be doing these teleconferencing for a few more weeks, if there is a specific department head member that you would need to have here, please let me know and I will have them there. We are trying to minimize the number of people and keeping the distances that we need to keep apart. So there's no problems of having any of them here or online, if that'll help you out. So just let me know who you need and I'll be more than happy to do that. I've been on several teleconferencing. I was on today with the Jefferson County Health Department, just to give you, as they are the central repository of information pertaining to our county. There is a total of 32 cases here. There are 5 what they call probable based on their symptoms, and they've been testing and are waiting for the results to come back. And there has been one confirmed death based on this COVID-19. They repeatedly, more testing is taking place, and hopefully that will, verify our numbers. We are staying low here, but I will tell you, both north of us and south of us have quite a few more cases than we have in Jefferson County here. Another conference call I was on today was with Congressman Johnson and his staff, and one of the questions that I had sent in, as well as several other people had sent in, is what is the possibility of any funding coming to the municipalities. Right now, there isn't anything set up because, one, they can't do directly to the municipalities as well as the townships and small cities. It has to be done through the governor's office or the states, and that's where it will maybe come down later on, and then the states will divide it up, and this will be for operating situations within the cities that have suffered here through the lack of revenue. They cannot just fund for loss of revenue. It has to be for something specific that they will later identify should this funding become available. Let me see what else here. All of our employees so far are fine. We've had no issues with them, no further testing, and the only testing that we have had have been with 3 employees, and that was based on their personal physicians and their current health status, and they were fine, and they're all back to work. And that's all I have at this time for council.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mavromatis. We'll now move on to our Law Director, Mr. Mastros.
Nothing tonight, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mastros. We do not have anyone signing in for miscellaneous this evening, and we'll now move on to public forum. And we do not have anyone signing in under public forum. Therefore, we'll now have a motion to go into executive session.